Welcome back to part two. We've already discussed what it means to be a leader. Now let's discuss how we become better leaders. There's a lot of different ways you can approach that, but for the most part, I think the biggest bang for your buck is going to come from the world of communication. It is a leader's job to communicate. You're either communicating a technique or a in-state or requirement, but you need to be communicating.
You understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Now, communication is a two-way street. It doesn't just matter how you think you're saying it. It matters what they're hearing. And so you need to be able to work within the team that you have and understand what they understand. So, for example, when I was a basketball coach, I had a bunch of freshmen on the team, and I'm on the sidelines in the middle of the game just screaming my lungs out at this kid, go to the elbow, go to the elbow. And some of you have probably experienced something similar. And I'm yelling at him the whole time, and he is literally running everywhere but the elbow, right where I'm trying to tell him to go, and he just won't go there.
Why are you yelling at me?
After the play ends, we get a timeout. He comes over to the sidelines, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And he looks at me. He's like, Coach, I'll do anything you want me to do. Tell me where the elbow is, and I'll go there.
Do what now?
I was dumbfounded. I completely assumed that this young man had the understanding of vocabulary that I did with basketball. Apparently he did not. But there's lots of things like that we make assumptions about these kids that we assume that they know what we're talking about because it seems so commonplace to us. But we really need to gauge our players' vocabulary, especially in the sport that we're playing. We may be using jargon, we may be using terminology they really don't know. And, this isn't a problem when you move up into the higher echelons of skill level, and you'll probably have some kids that have been playing since they were, 5 years old, and they have all of that knowledge already. But then you'll have some kids who are just trying it out, who this is their first year they've ever played, or they've only ever played like pickup basketball or flag football or something like that. And you're really going to have to dive into that, because if they're not getting what you're saying, that's your fault.
No, you're definitely the problem.
You're the leader. It's your responsibility to make sure that information is received, and not only received, but understood. I know if you've been a coach for more than 5 seconds, especially of teenagers, you're going to get probably one of two experiences when you try to tell a kid something. They're going to look at you and go,
No, it's well enough.
like that, which means they haven't gotten anything, or they're going to go, I already know that, and then go off and do the exact thing you told them not to do.
I know you know everything.
So you are at a particular disadvantage when dealing with teenagers because, one, they know everything, but two, they don't know anything. So you're going to have to fight through that and figure out a dialogue and a way to communicate with them that is received. So don't get too attached to a way of communication. For example, a lot of people are married to ideas or ways of explaining things, because that's the way they learned them. And that's not wrong. It's a good place to start. But if you're constantly going back to the same explanation and the kid's still not getting it, you need to make a change. You need to adapt the way that you're thinking about the problem and move forward, because it's not about you. It's about them. It's about them figuring it out. It's about them understanding that kind of thing. And so you need to change and morph your communication style a little bit. Now, there are times where your communication style will be dictated by the events that are happening right then. So the way you talk to your players during a game may be different than the way you talk to your players during practice or outside of the gym or outside of the field or whatever, the weight room, wherever you're coaching them. That's okay. That's not disingenuous. You behave differently, right? If you're in a competition, it's heated, it's powerful, it's exciting, tensions are high, passions are high. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But to think that you're going to talk to your kids the same way when you're not in the middle of a game is absurd.
Do you want to go to war, Malaki?
And if you try to, it's going to come off as disingenuous, and that's going to create a trust issue. The other thing I think to be careful of when you are trying to break things down is to not disrespect your audience or your team necessarily. And that doesn't mean that you don't break things down to the lowest level, because I think you should, but you have to pay attention to what they're understanding, what they're not understanding. And that's your job as a leader, is to gauge that assessment. Because if you're continually breaking it down to the nth degree and they've already figured it out, now they're going to feel like you don't respect them, you don't think highly of them, and that you think they're idiots. So it's a fine line to walk, and communication is a very tricky thing because everybody's got their own styles, everybody's got their own way of doing things. I know for me personally, I like to talk, and I'm pretty loud. I like to kind of shout and yell even when it's not necessarily warranted. So that's something I struggle with when I'm coaching kids who are maybe a little more introverted or maybe don't receive that type of communication style very well. And I need to make sure that I'm adapting the way that I speak so that I can best coach them, that I can best bring them along on the team. Again, there's the ditches, right? You got to keep it between the ditches. The idea is you don't want to go too far into that extreme where you're catering your behavior and your communication style to every single individual, because that is just too cumbersome. If you're a football coach, you have 100 kids you're coaching. You can't do that for every single person. Now, that being said, you want to get the most out of your players. You want them to get the most out of themselves. And for that, you need to provide them with the communication that they require. So sometimes that means bringing them closer to you and helping them understand the way you communicate. And sometimes that means going closer to them. Also, you might want to reach outside of your comfort zone a little bit. If you're an old school coach and you write all your plays on a whiteboard or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. But understand that these kids are different. They grew up in a digital age and they have their phones with them all the time. And if you really want to get feedback with them, maybe you need to text them instead of trying to call them and leaving a voicemail. Nothing screams, okay, boomer, like having to answer someone else's voicemail.
Give me the police station, quickly, please.
So understand that there are different ways of communication, not just styles. Use text, use, God forbid, social media. But, if that's your thing, then that's fine. Obviously, it needs to be appropriate. And again, you're trying to keep it between the ditches. You want to make sure that everything's above board and that you're not compromising yourself inappropriately or discussing things with kids outside of school that you shouldn't be. And again, that's just sort of a disclaimer. I'm not suggesting that anyone do anything inappropriate. But you need to reach out to your kids in a way that they appreciate, that they understand. Once again, I'm not suggesting you start making TikToks videos where you start talking about Riz and sus and all these other words that I don't understand. Because again, that feels fake. That feels like you're just catering to them. And they're going to see through that. Nobody likes the cool guy who's trying to, bond with you as a teenager.
How do you do, fellow kids?
You just want people to be honest, and you want people to take a genuine interest in the things that you're interested in. So when you're doing that communication and in the back and forth, just be aware of that. Still be you, though. So here's the next part of communication that gets a little tricky. You have a natural communication style, like I talked about before, and you need to lean into that. However, you still have to get your point across. So if you're naturally introverted, that's okay. You don't have to say a lot. I've had great coaches who said very few words, and I'm not exaggerating, just like a handful of words. But what they said was just gold. And so when they spoke, it was fantastic and just drank it all in. It was fantastic. Then I had other coaches that never stopped talking, just chatter. And it's hard to kind of break through that. And you kind of have to listen for those nuggets and you have to pay attention to where it's coming from. I've had coaches that use a ton of profanity and, that's their thing, then that's their thing. I don't think it's very effective, but if that's the way you communicate, that's the way it is. You can't argue against Bobby Knight's record. He's an amazing coach and has been able to motivate amazing players using his style of communication. It's not mine. And if I tried to adopt it, it would feel fake and they would see through that. So don't try to adopt someone else's style. Be who you are, but just try to kind of nudge it in either direction so you're making sure you're hitting as many of the kids as you can with that style of communication and you're bringing everybody in so that you can all improve together. So when we move forward through leadership and communication, the two go hand in hand. If you are not communicating clearly, then your leadership is not effective. And if you don't have the tools and the confidence to be a leader, then you can be the best communicator in the world, but people aren't going to trust you. So those things are really tied together. So now that we talked about communication, let's move into a drill that you can do with your players. We'll do it right now. Well, we'll virtually do it right now, but in person we can do it. It's really easy. All you need are some blindfolds, bandanas, towels, t-shirts, whatever you want to use, and then an open space with some shoes or chairs or other things like that. The exercise is called Minefield. Now, Minefield is set up as a leadership and teamwork exercise, and it's heavily communication focused. So the idea is you set up a minefield, essentially, an area in a room that you mark a left and right limit and a start and a finish line. With your team, you identify one leader. That leader goes over to the finish line. Everyone else on the team has to get blindfolded, and they line up at the start line. Now, it's the leader's job to vocally guide their team through the minefield. After all the blindfields have been placed, you're going to go out and place obstacles in the minefield that only the leader can see and no one else can see. And so the leader has to use their voice and their information that they have, the other team doesn't, to get them through the minefield without hitting any of the obstacles. If they hit one of the obstacles, they have to go back and start at the beginning. And this is a much, much more difficult task than it seems at first glance. And it's difficult for a bunch of different reasons. One, it's difficult for the leader because they have to basically remove themselves from the situation because they can see what's going on. So they may give guidance like, all right, move forward. Oh, stop and go to the left. Okay, back up some, or move forward a little bit. You could see how those are very unclear orders. They are very confusing. How much is a little bit? How far do I go to the left? Do I run forward? That's really difficult. And then on the other side of the communication chain, when you're in the blindfold, that's even harder, in my opinion, because you are completely at the mercy of the leader. You have no knowledge of what's going on. You don't know where anything is, and you have to be completely trustworthy of that other individual. So throughout the drill, you have this back and forth. And what's really, really interesting when you do the drill a couple of times, so the first time it goes through, usually the team doesn't say a word. They just are silent, and the leader just tries to guide them through this minefield as best they can. Sometimes they make mistakes, sometimes they don't. But either midway through or after, and they do it a second iteration, then the team starts giving the leader feedback. Hey, that doesn't make sense. Hey, how far do you want me to go? Do you want me to step forward? Do you want me to step back? What do you want me to do? And it becomes a much better drill for communication because now you have two-way communication. The team is asking questions. They're pulling information. The leader is pushing information. And between the two, they come up with a clear operating picture. And so that's the goal, is that you want to create an atmosphere where not only is the coach or the leader pushing that information, but the team is pulling it because they have a vested interest. They're reliant on you to tell them what to do. And so if they're not asking questions, then are they really that invested in the situation? But once they start realizing that if they ask questions, they'll be more successful, then they start pulling that information. And that translates directly over into the sport. That changes your situation from you speaking to your group of kids and players and telling them a bunch of things versus having a conversation about how to best execute the plan of action. So, if you're giving them a play and it's fairly complex and you say, all right, you go here, you do this is that, and the other, and you do that, and they all just nod and they run out on the field or court or whatever, and they do the thing and it doesn't make any sense and they don't understand it,
I have no idea what's going on.
then it's a waste of time. Whereas if you've gone through this minefield drill and you've realized that the team needs to ask questions, then they'll come back and say, hey, coach, I don't understand. Why do I need to go there? What good does it do for me to be over here? How am I serving the team? And they can pull information when they don't have it because they may have questions you haven't even considered yet. So the Minefield exercise is fantastic. It's a really, really easy thing to do, and it's really easy to set up, and it really creates trust and enhances those communication skills that are absolutely necessary. The other thing I really like to do with this drill, so I let them go through it one time, and then we conduct what's called an AAR, an after-action review. We do this all the time in the military, but it is invaluable. Tough word for me to say. It is really good to do an after-action review.
You're not so good with putting the words together and they're coming out.
And what you do with an after-action review is essentially you just discuss what happened. You say, okay, what was our mission? All right, well, it was to get from this side to that side. All right, so leader, what was hard for you? And then they tell you what they felt like was hard. And then team, what was hard for you? And then they tell you what they think was hard and say, okay, what are some ways we could do it better? If we were to do it right now, how would we do it better? And then they usually have a bunch of different ideas, and people have different takes on things and understandings. and they come to some sort of conclusion. And you say, all right, line it up, do it again. And this time, I'll give them a time limit. So I'll say, all right, you got 3 minutes to get through the entire minefield, and go. 9 times out of 10, they're going to be successful. 1, because it's not scary. They know what they're getting into. 2, they've already assessed what they did wrong in the first time, so they're not going to make those mistakes again. They're going to make new mistakes probably, but they're going to make less. And they also understand the objective, and they understand the exercise better. So that has a direct correlation to practice and to games, and how important it is to discuss what happens and then practice it again. Because if you're just doing things and you're making mistakes, you say, hey, don't do that again, or, oh, that was a mistake. Okay, Roger, check, but I haven't fixed it. I've just identified it. So you need to identify it and then go back and fix it. So talk about practices after the practice. Have 5 minutes and sit down with the team and say, okay, guys, what went well? What went bad? How can we be better tomorrow? That's really, really valuable. You are going to improve so much, and the players' understandings are going to improve so much. Watching game film, that's something that most sports don't do still. I understand that there's a time commitment that is required, but really when I was coming up in high school, now obviously it's been a few minutes.
Back in the day.
Only football watched game film. Nobody else did. And then about my junior year, we started watching game film for basketball, and we started discussing things more, and we got better. Every time you do that, you get better. When you see the mistakes you made, you can say, I see what I did there. I'm not going to do that again. And you are better for it. So have those AARs. Have them after practice. Have them after a drill, okay? Have them after a single play. What happened? What went wrong? What went well? It's a really easy conversation. And you just drive a couple of little questions just to get it moving. Don't make it too long. You don't want to discuss everything for an hour, but you need a couple of minutes just to assess, and then go back and hit it again. Try it again. What happened? Let's make it better, and then you will do it better, I guarantee. So, Minefield Exercise is one of my most favorite. It's really easy to do. It's really simple to understand and simple to execute. So give it a try and let me know what you think. Part 3 coming at you later.